punishment for a life well lived. I'm working on a book on this topic, and some of the ideas are just have been developed over the years in the research that I've done. And I was on a sabbatical at the University of Cambridge, and this is where the ideas began to emerge last fall. So I'll start with a story. This is Van Schuler. The story with Van begins when in 2006, I think it was, we got a call from one of the Seattle TV stations because we published an important finding on the relationship between habitual exercise and risk of dementia. And we showed that even a small amount of exercise every day would reduce your risk. So they wanted to have somebody that they could talk to. And I said, well, Van Schuler, she's 100 years old, she's very active, she's a great person. So we called her and said, we need you to do this. Oh, I'd be glad to do it, but you've got to do it right away because tomorrow I'm taking a trip to Buenos Aires for a tango convention. So we got everybody, ran around, and she did make it. She came, she danced, and so forth. She came by city bus just down the hill here to Med Park East and put on her dancing shoes and was televised. And after that, she lived another 7 years and died at 108. So she's quite an interesting case, if you will, about enlightened aging and how you can prepare and take an activist role to aging. And what I'm calling enlightened aging is, on this slide, it's a hope-filled approach as opposed to a feeling of desperation as one gets old. The idea is we can combine what we know about healthy aging today and use it with foresight to enter older age. Enlightened aging will empower people. It's an activist kind of event, so you not only prepare, but you also live with the changes that are pretty much an inevitable part of aging. And it, as I said earlier, it came from the studies that I'll tell you a little bit about as we go through the presentation. Just a few words about the Group Health Research Institute. Some people will know this well, others won't. But I came here in 2002, about 20-some years after it was formed. I left after being at the UW as the medical director for 13, 14 years because I've invested a lot of energy in aging, and an aging study doesn't really get good until it's really old, because that's when events start to occur. So I moved to this non-proprietary public interest research shop. We have faculty in many different disciplines, from physicians to statisticians to epidemiologists, social science researchers, and we have a modest shop compared to what I was used to at the university. And our mission is to improve health and healthcare for everyone through the kind of research that we do. And we do research in common areas. We don't research rare conditions, but we do common problems with the idea that public domain research, we don't work as just for group health. We do public good research because that's our philosophy. It helps group health because group health is what we call a learning healthcare system, but really it's for all of us and the future of health sciences that we exist. And it's a very exciting, mission-driven place to work. This is a graphic that shows you some of our research areas. I don't know how well it shows up, the print is kind of small, but obesity, women's health, child and adolescent health, aging and geriatrics, patient safety, pharmacoepidemiology, with these other areas of major programs. We have big programs in cancer prevention, preventive care, immunization, and so forth. And it's all around this idea of improving health and healthcare through partnership, collaboration, and research. We get almost all of our money from the federal government or quasi-federal-like agencies. We're trying to diversify our funding source because of the sequester and of the other problems that have happened with our National Institutes of Health, but hopefully that will be looking up as we continue to have a more prosperous economy. But in aging, what we're looking at is things like what's normal as we age, mental and physical. What is unusual, a kind of decline to happen? What is the kind of decline that can lead to Alzheimer's disease? How can you minimize avoidable decline? How can you stay on a flatter curve if you're having any decline than a steep curve? And then, of course, how can you prevent or delay the onset of chronic diseases or conditions? And in my case, we do a lot of work on looking for ways to prevent or delay the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. How can we successfully adapt to chronic conditions if, and usually when, they do occur? And how can we help people maintain their function and independence as long as possible? The study that I'm going to get most of my information from is quite exciting for me. We started this study as a demonstration project in 1986. We've had continuous funding since then, and just today we got a notice of grant award for another 5 years. So at the end of, 2020, we'll be 34 years old, and it's the longest study of its kind that's still running, and we're very proud of that. Part of the reason it's been successful is because we've had wonderful cooperation with the subjects, and Group Health is very supportive of the research. So we're looking at frequency and risk factors for dementia. I'll tell you a little bit more about the details, but over the years, since it's been going on for so long, it's become what we call a living laboratory of aging, because not only are we looking at dementia, but this next round we're going to flip it around and look at resilience and robustness. People that should be at that stage where they're becoming demented, in fact, are just the opposite, like Van Schuler in that picture that I started with. We see people every couple of years, and we observe normal and abnormal aging. And the nice thing about research at Group Health is it's population-based. So what you see is representative of the world outside. When I worked in very highly specialized clinic, we didn't know whether we were finding things that would generalize to larger populations. The main thing that has happened in the last 10 years is we started out with our own research data from the data we collect when people would come in to see us, to we have medical record data. The average number of years that a person has been at Group Health when they enter our study is over 30. That's 65 and older, 30 years. So we have extensive chart data, and one of our major projects has been to collect all that into abstracted form. Lab and pharmacy are automated, and in the last 10 years, 12 years since Tom Montine came to the university, we've developed probably the largest in the world population-based brain bank related to dementia. So we have around 600 samples that we can do population-based neuropathology, which is very unusual. And then in the last 8 years, we've been part of the genomic revolution. So we're part of the eMERGE study, which is you take data from a biobank, or samples from a biobank, you do a genetic analysis lab test to do something called GWAS, which is 500 to 1,000 to 1 million bits of genetic data. And we're now going to enter our third 4-year funding cycle of that in the next month or two. And we're going deeper and deeper into the human genome with this combination of all the data we have, all the data that are in the electronic records of our subjects. And so we're participating in many studies nationally and around the world. So it's this idea of a learning laboratory of aging is very exciting to us. So why is this important? I suspect you know these numbers, but every time I go over them, they just kind of astound me. So 30-some years ago, there were 720,000 people over the age of 90. Now there are 1.9 million and more. The numbers are expected to double when the boomers start hitting late old age, and that will lead to a quadrupling of that. And the biggest spike in the U.S. Population will be in people over the age of 90. And those of you who are experiencing that, you know a lot about it, but we've not had the chance to observe hundreds of thousands of people over the age of 90 in human history. So that's new territory, and I guarantee you there will be lots of interesting discovery because of that opportunity. Here are the numbers about dementia and why I'm passionate about trying to find ways to prevent or delay this illness. These are the rates that we find all around the world. It's not unique to Seattle or Minneapolis or New York or London. About 35% of people between 85 and 90 will have some form of dementia, half between 90 and 95, and 95 and older, it's probably between 2/3 and 3/4. And so if you look at those numbers and then you add population predictions, there's a demographer named James Vopel who works out of Denmark and the German coast. He's predicted that if current trends persist, the children born in the year 2000 have a 50-50 chance of living to the next century. So think about that. That's a lot of people who are going to be 100 years old. So this sort of adds a little bit of urgency to our topic. Here's how the study works. We take a random sample of people, drawing numbers out of a hat essentially, and say that we want people who've been in group health for 2 years, and we evaluate them and make sure that they're not demented. They're from the sort of Seattle region of group health. They're 65 years and older, but no upper limits. We don't seek volunteers. We ask people who've been drawn from the hat, would you be willing to participate in the study? And these are some of our findings. We did a randomized trial of people who had dementia and showed that if caregivers and a person with dementia exercise every day, their physical decline is less, and they're less likely to be admitted to a skilled nursing facility for behavioral problems. And that was a pretty important project. We did some studies on falls, and the question there was trip or slip. So what do you think is worse, slipping or tripping in falls? And hands down, it was tripping. The most dangerous thing to wear are stockings only or bare feet in terms of falling. So I told my parents to always put a set of slippers right next to the bedside and just slip them on. You have to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. We did a number of projects around survival with Alzheimer's disease, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But it cuts off about half of life expectancy. And interestingly, as you get older, the difference between having the disease and not in terms of life expectancy gets less. So of the age of about 90 or 95, you have about the same life expectancy with and without the condition. This is the finding of exercise. We used a very low threshold, but it was a 30 to 40% lower risk of developing dementia for those who exercised at least 3 times a week for a modest amount. And at the same study, good physical function, which you get from exercise, seems to delay the onset of the disease. So re-engaging in physical activity is key, or engaging. And we're in the middle of organizing some randomized trials because the evidence on exercise is just very convincing. The challenge is, how do you do it? And how does it get done more easily by more people in our city? We found something really very interesting with the association with the Montine lab. Alzheimer's disease was thought to be a disease of protein deposits, plaques and tangles. But in fact, what we found is that there are these little microscopic injuries to blood vessels called microinfarcts, which are much more responsible for some of the disease that's out there. Maybe explain 30 to 40% of the risk of the disease. And they're important because you can do something about them. We don't know what to do about the proteins that are deposited in Alzheimer's, but we do know something about preserving the health of blood vessels. We showed that people who participate in the fitness programs, like Silver Sneakers and Lifetime Fitness at Group Health, had lower healthcare costs compared to people who didn't. There was a belief, and in fact there was a randomized trial that drugs like ibuprofen and naproxen would somehow protect the brain against Alzheimer's. We found just the opposite, that in fact it was more risky if you took higher doses of these, and in fact you can actually see changes in the microscope. So we're able to look at not just the exposure and what happens in your behavior or your mental function, but we can also look at under the microscope and see, does what we see in life correspond to what's happening in the brain. Hospitalization for acute illness, serious problem. Most people will experience a considerable decline if they end up in an emergency kind of severe illness acutely. The atrial fibrillation increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease, a modest amount. Depression is, in earlier life, seems to be linked to Alzheimer's, and the question, or dementia, and the question is really, is this an early sign, or is this just some other abnormality that we don't understand? This study in 2013 made the front page of the New England Journal of Medicine, and all over the world got noticed because we have so much data that we were able to put together literally hundreds of thousands of bits of blood sugar data and show that people that had a little bit higher level of blood sugar are at a little bit higher level of risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Not enough that you or I could perceive that, but when you think about the diet and the obesity epidemic and the kind of drinks that people are consuming, this has tremendous public health importance, and it's just another way to try to reduce the burden, if you will, of the disease. And then this latest study that somebody mentioned they'd seen was anticholinergic drugs. These are drugs that are used for a whole host of things, from depression to problems with your bladder in a man, to sleep. Benadryl is very commonly used for that. And people that take these drugs are at a slightly higher risk of getting Alzheimer's disease if they're in the higher dose level over a couple of years. And this was important because we used to think that these drugs would only cause temporary confusion, a delirium kind of condition. But in fact, we followed up a study in France that was published a couple years earlier to study it in our population, and found that in fact it is associated with a true increase in risk, not just a transient loss of cognitive function, but actual dementia. So where we're going is it's this living learning laboratory. We work closely with Gail Jarvik and her team and Debbie Nickerson at the University of Washington, and we've got extensive collaborations with University of Pennsylvania, where everybody puts their data into a large database, and it allows us to study thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people. The Brain Institute that Paul Allen has funded has gotten very interested in traumatic brain injury. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the Seahawks, but because of this brain bank, and because we have information of people collected many years before our subjects, and prospectively, we can actually look at traumatic brain injuries and study them under the microscope. And the Allen Brain Institute is a fabulous place for deep science with analyses of billions of bits of data. And then, as I told you, I'm just thrilled because we're going to get another 5 years of funding. And this next round, we have 3 aims. The first aim is to continue to look at the relationship between high blood pressure and glucose and cholesterol, some of the things that are part of general health maintenance, and try to tease out how they might relate to brain aging. The Institute of Medicine just came out with a very important report on brain aging, which is encouraging people to study not just dementia, but aging of the brain at large. And we're going to flip that over and then study resilience and look at people who reach the age of 85 or 90 and are relatively disability free, or have a genetic makeup which says you should be affected by these diseases, but you're not, and begin to tease out whether we can find protective factors. We also have a third aim for our study, which is to support other studies. And I don't know how many there are, but there's 20 or 30 other studies that are using the ACT as a place to collaborate or to just simply take our data, because we can't analyze it all. So here's a few of the sort of myths about aging. People show these slides of Ponce de Leon, of people coming in, sort of hunched over, and they go into the fountain of youth, and they come out, on the cover of, I don't know, Sports Illustrated or whatever, but it doesn't happen that way. But if there is a magic bullet, exercise is probably the one that we know now. But I guarantee you, you will not find a single pill that will reverse aging. I followed this field now for a lot of years, and as you look at the process of aging, just think, could any one thing deal with something as complicated? You all know how complicated aging is, right? You're aging, so am I. The second myth is that it's an inevitable downward spiral. And I think nowadays we're beginning to see that that's not true, and in fact, we published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine last year, 2014, in which we showed that the rate of dementia is going down in 5 separate studies in North America and in Europe. The numbers of people that have the condition are going up because there's so many people living to 90 and older. But if you look at the rates in Sweden, in Rotterdam, in the US, in Sweden, Rotterdam, the US. 2 studies in the US, one earlier study, and then in Denmark. The rates are going down. And the thing that's associated with those rates going down, education, better control of cardiovascular risk, and prosperity. People born later in the 20th century had progressively more prosperous times as they were born later. So, the people that, in one of our studies with the Health and Retirement Study, we showed that over a 10-year period, people, when they got Alzheimer's disease, they got it later in life, and the interval between when it started and when they died was shorter. We call that a compression of cognitive morbidity. So this is the compression of aging. I mentioned what we think it's due to. I should have mentioned reduction in smoking. That's also decreased. And I mentioned earlier the obesity epidemic and the diabetes problem with our work on glucose threatens to wipe out these gains. So we've got some serious things to work on. And again, healthy lifestyle, better health care will make the difference. And so where this takes me is to sort of, well, what can you do or what do you need to know to be an enlightened ager? Well, one thing you need to know is the myth that old people are unhappy is just a myth. And this came to me in a paper that I read a few years ago, where one of my colleagues that I've known for my academic career did a survey of older and younger adults. And he asked people, who do you think is happier? The people over the age of 70 or the people around the age of 30? And everybody said, well, of course, everybody 30. You've got to be happier when you're 30 than when you're 70 or older. Well, in fact, when they measured it, the older people were happier than the 30-year-olds by objective scales. And there is a science now of so-called happiness research. And in fact, if this is one of the things I worked on when I was in England, you could survey, there's a lot of literature now. It's actually a U-shaped curve of happiness with aging. You tend to be happy at about 18, 19, 20, and then it starts to go down, 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 and then when you hit your late 40s, it starts to go up again, and when you're in your 60s, you're at least as happy as the 18, 20-year-olds, and as far as we know, it doesn't ever stop going up. It goes up till age 90. So we shouldn't go around with this idea that getting old is just nothing but misery, and so I think that's a myth that you should think about. And the thing that really makes a difference, I think, is something called resilience. That is, how can you adapt to stress and adversity? Resilience, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's bend, don't break, right? Bend, don't break. And the features that I think will allow a person, and myself included, is be active, know what your health is and what you might be expecting as you go forward, and take care of yourself. Don't be a passive, just take what comes your way. You are going to change, we all change. There are things you can't do that you wish you could do, but you have to be accepting but don't deny or ignore it. And then this idea of building reserves. We have the ability to build cognitive reserves, mental reserves, physical reserves, and social reserves. And Len Cobb will know that Robert Bruce had this idea of building cardiac reserve as important for cardiac aging. And you can build reserves in many different settings. So here's the active role. Some of this is just, I think everybody should know this, but it's worth repeating. Don't smoke, chew tobacco, don't drink too much, try to maintain a healthy weight. Don't necessarily need to lose weight as you get older, but try to maintain a healthy rate. Exercise, ideally every day. Get into the habit where you feel better when you have some exercise in a day, and then you know you've arrived at exercise regularly. And then manage stress and learning to cope. We believe that as you go forward with healthcare, there's a thing called overtreatment and overdiagnosis, which occurs quite a lot in our modern healthcare system. And we believe one way to deal with that is through an idea called shared decision making, where you learn about the choices that you're making and make them with your physician or other provider, and try to avoid overtreatment and overprescribing. This medical care system is a juggernaut, and I'm sure you all know a little bit about that. But think about what treatments you are really going to help you and which medicines you really need. Accept change. Think about what people want the most. We did 2 research studies, one in an Asian population and one in the group health, a white majority population, asking people what makes up successful aging in their view. And it wasn't longevity. We thought they'd be different between Japanese culture and the majority culture. They're not different at all. Each group had the same priorities: meaning, fulfillment, purpose, strong relationships, ability to continue to contribute, and try not to be any more dependent than you can possibly be. People going into aging don't want to be a burden to others. And then as you do experience the changes in aging, keep the values in mind. I talked about building reserve. Probably in terms of building cognitive reserve, your physical reserve is more important than any kind of brain exercises you can do. You can exercise your brain, and I'm sure some of you do, but the main thing you'll do when you exercise your brain is you'll learn to do that one thing you're doing better. And it doesn't generalize to brain aging writ large. Mobility, balance, strength, tremendous opportunity to improve balance with balance exercises, and of course bone strength with kind of jarring exercise like walking, muscle strength, tremendous ability to improve people, the most frail 90-year-olds